All right, good evening. On behalf of the rest of the team here, who I'll introduce in a moment, we appreciate you taking part in this session for question and answers to learn a little bit more about the virtual learning model as it'll extend into the 21-22 school year and beyond. So tonight we are hoping to address some of the frequently asked questions as well as any that come in live from our individuals who are engaged with us right now in real time. On the next slide, we'll give you the purpose of our session, which is to ensure a common understanding of the background, the why we're at this point, how we got where we are. We have been engaging with a Transforming the Future Leadership Council to help us make the decisions and formulate the programming that you'll see today, specifically around the how each model will be delivered at the different grade spans. And then again, working through some of those frequently asked questions. We will provide you an overview of the key themes of the things we received. And this entire presentation will be recorded so people can refer to it later on. We will also be housing it on our website, and those details on the next slide will also be reflected. So to introduce our team, I'm going to begin with Paula Guerin, who is our current Pine-Richland Virtual Academy principal. So many thanks to her, the leadership of her and the teachers within that academy, that we are even at this point, because we have K through 12 right now, over 800 Pine-Richland students taking part in our virtual learning options. And so what we've learned is we have thriving kids in this model, and we want to make sure that we can provide it for them and the staff members who have really learned a lot throughout this entire year and are now able to deliver effective instruction. And so something we really want to underscore is that we really have effective programming this way. So many thanks to her. She is one of the reasons why we're to the point that we are. So thank you. In addition, we have Dr. Kazilla from Hans Elementary School, representing the K-3. We have Jacob Minsinger from Pine-Richland Middle School. We also have Dr. Stephanie Sviller representing Pine-Richland High School. And also Mr. Noel Hustwit, our Director of Student Services and Special Education. So each one of them will provide a different perspective on some of these questions as we go through them. If there are questions that are not answered within the context of this general Q&A session, we are offering individual consultation sessions. So if you refer back to the e-blast that brought you to this point, you can click on the link to sign up for one of those slots. And all of us who you see here tonight will be a part of answering those questions in 10-minute slots for families as needed. And we can add additional if we need to, if we end up utilizing those slots. So thanks so much again, even to the team, for being here to help explain everything this evening. So just as an overview, we want to remind you, going into next school year, we will be offering a fully in-person, 5-day-a-week traditional model, and we'll be offering a fully virtual learning model. We will not be having the hybrid model any longer. We are asking that families will be selecting and staying in a model. And so this Q&A is the first part of an informational time period for parents and their students to be thinking about what they want to do next year in terms of their choice. The survey will officially open up on June 1st for families to make a commitment for that binding option for the entirety of the 21-22 school year. And that survey will close on June 14th. So in the meantime, you'll be able to also take part in those individual consultation sessions and so forth if necessary. You see a tiny bit.ly link on that same slide. If you want to go back one just for 1 second, Mrs. Guerin. So if you want to write that down, that will take you to the same Q&A form that we were collecting questions in advance of this session to help structure it. And if there are additional questions you come up with throughout the evening, that'll help you get there maybe quicker. So I'll give you just a moment to copy that down. Going to that URL will take you to the same form. Enter your questions. We'll be monitoring it in real time and then have specifically left time at the end to address anything that is not too nitty-gritty of a specific individual question. If there are some of those, since we do ask your name on the form, we can also follow up with you after this evening. So thank you so much for that. Okay, now ready to the next slide. Thank you. So we've been discussing that we are at a transformational moment in education. It's really the impact of the pandemic that accelerated a time frame of change within education that sometimes is a more traditional kind of model that it's hard to break through. But we truly had breakthrough change in this past year where we have transformed the way that education looks and is offered. And as we mentioned previously, we have students thriving within this virtual model, and we see this as a chance to redefine what happens in the future. Now, we know that's not going to happen completely completely overnight. So in terms of what that looks like on our continuum, we're going from our little red star moment to, on the next slide, you can see beyond that point next year, that we have a big red star, which will be the future, 2022 and beyond, where we want to be able to look back and say, look at all the improvements we've made, the growth we've made. We've transformed so much by that point. So this first year is really only going to be our first year dedicating ourselves and our organization to a fully virtual model for the entire school year at the start of the school year. If we think about it, we were extending it to 9 weeks at a time throughout the current school year, and really didn't know, from 9 weeks to the next if we would be where we were. So because the pandemic took the course that it did, we ended up extending it through the entirety of the year, and have, thrived and really found some reasons why to keep it. So the why is very clear. It became more about how we would go about designing this instruction. And so again, to reiterate, we have two models that we're looking at. On the next slide, you'll see the traditional model on the left. And at the time when we designed this, we were thinking about 95% of our families would still opt to remain in that traditional in-person model. It's probably closer to 97. We right now are only looking at the initial interest survey we sent to our virtual parents and students to say, how likely is it that you'll stay next year? We're projecting about 100 students between grades K through 12. That is not many students per grade level, but it is enough to certainly make a difference, and every single student and their preferences in terms of learning matter, and they count for us. Additionally, we have about 72 students who could be Pine-Richland students who are currently attending outside cyber academies or cyber schools of some sort. And by committing to this model and offering it sustainably into the future, our hope is that we can also attract those students back into our model. So what we will be discussing in the slides that follow are really what this will look like by grade span. And so within that fully virtual academy, we're going to have core classes that are offered in different ways, speaking specifically to the elementary for a moment, synchronous instruction with a dedicated teacher versus the secondary, where there'll still be synchronous instruction, but they'll be following the course schedule that they would if they were in person. So there will be some high flex courses and things like that. So we'll get into all those details in the slides ahead, but we are planning to offer the same learning experiences that we would to our students in person in the virtual model, but with a slightly limited program of studies at the secondary level. So we don't have a specific look of what that will look like yet. We're in the process of narrowing that down, and we will be communicating it out to families, but there are obviously some courses that don't translate in a precise manner in the same way in which they would if it were in person. So for instance, if you think about some of our engineering and technology classes, not many of us have that type of machinery at home to be able to follow along with a lesson and fully obtain the credit that we would otherwise gain if we were in person having that experience. So quickly on the next slide, just want to credit those and say thank you to our Transforming the Future Leadership Council members. So we have staff members, students, parents, board members, community members who are part of the Leadership Council. And so they've helped think through each of the concepts that you'll see today, as well as the staffing subcommittee that you'll see on the right-hand side. So that was a number of different administrators and teachers from across our K-12 spectrum and all the different lenses within, so special education, special areas, et cetera, trying to design what our educational models would look like for each grade span. So we're going to move into the first of which is grades 1 through 5. So the first thing to highlight here is when we came in together as a committee, on our enrollment, our registration for kindergarten, there was only one family who had so far expressed interest, which made us pause and think through the kindergarten model in general, and whether we felt that in this first year for 21-22, we wanted to go ahead and launch that course, or if we felt better having those kids in person with us to learn what we refer to as the hidden curriculum. So the social skills, how we do school, the procedures, as well as the content areas. And so we feel like that could potentially in the future be a growth point that we end up adding back in. But for now, the philosophy of the district was, let's bring those kids in, really make sure that they have a solid understanding and foundation. And then when they have the developmental readiness way a little bit better, when they get to first grade, then we would be prepared to support them. So in grades 1 through 5, I will turn this over. First, Mrs. Gearin will give a little background on what that looks like. And then Mr. Hustwit is going to speak to special education in general as it would relate to each of the grade spans. And then we'll move through to the rest of them beyond that. So Mrs. Gearin.
Okay, thank you. So with grades 1 through 5, as Dr. Justice said, we are going to be having fully dedicated teachers. Those grade levels will each be self-contained with one teacher for all of their core content. So reading, ELA, social studies, science, and math, they will have that one dedicated teacher. It'll be very similar to what we were able to offer this year. They will also receive their Pine-Richland device, which all of our students will, whether they are in person or virtual. The one difference from this year, for those of you that are familiar with that, are the special areas or encores or any of that. We don't really have electives at the elementary level, but those will be offered in an asynchronous manner, very similar to what we're doing currently in K-3. However, as Dr. Justice said, we're always looking for ways to improve, and we are going to intentionally build in office hours times so that way those teachers are able to make that connection and build those relationships with the students. They'll be able to have a dedicated time for the students to ask questions or for them to kind of lead a lesson, but those classes will actually be done asynchronously, which is something that we saw on the surveys with the feedback that the parents were very interested in, because not only did it offer that flexibility, but it gave, students an opportunity for an additional screen break during the day if they wanted to work on those things in the evening or on the weekend. So for grades 1 through 5, to keep it consistent, we are going to have the asynchronous specials. And Mr. Hustwood, do you want to talk about the special ed here?
Certainly. So as we examined our potential enrollees for the virtual academy for next year, the special education population in grades 1 through 12 was potentially very small. However, through our experience this year, we did find that the most effective method of instruction for students with special needs, especially at the lower levels, was to have a dedicated virtual special education teacher. So what we are looking at is the potential to have a dedicated virtual special education teacher for special education students in grades 1 through 8. And with the smaller potential population of students at the high school, we're looking at a high-flex remote-in type of model. In addition to general special education services, we also offer a number of research-based interventions for students needing them in either reading or math. That will take on the look of the high-flex model, where students would live stream into the regular classroom within the buildings. We also have, as you see on there, our RAM time that students could participate potentially via live stream. And I think we'll talk a little bit later about our MTSS program and what that will look like. But grades 1 through 8, we're looking at a virtually dedicated special education teacher with also some live stream options for those students.
Excellent, thanks. Yeah, and then 6th grade, Mrs. Gearin, if you don't mind that as well.
Sure. 6th grade is really very similar to grades 1 through 5 with the dedicated teacher. The big difference is we know in 6th grade we're getting the students ready to transition to the middle school, so we still wanted to keep that teaming option in place. So our intention is to have a dedicated team of teachers, and those dedicated team of teachers will have in-person students as well as virtual students. Now, that's not to be confused with the high flex where they're live streaming into the classroom. So if you picture a team of 3 teachers, maybe 2 of those homerooms are in-person students, and then the third homeroom would be a fully virtual homeroom. And as they move throughout their schedule for the day, the teacher would be able to focus solely on those virtual students in that homeroom. So it's a great way to get them used to switching teachers and, gaining that independence and just really getting ready for middle school, while also still having that dedicated teacher in the virtual environment.
Okay, Mr. Minsinger.
All right, and as Mrs. Gearin kind of alluded to, transitioning to middle school, the virtual model will look slightly different, similar to what secondary looks like this year, with a few changes. So one of the exciting things that we're happy to say is that we will be providing devices to all of our students in 7th and 8th grade starting next year, whether they are coming to us in person or whether they are logging in virtually. For our fully dedicated virtual teacher element. There will be elements, as Mr. Hustwit said, of special education that will be happening with a dedicated case manager for any virtual students with IEP documentation. However, those students will also still be fully included in our classes under what we are calling and what is termed as the high flex model. And so what that will look like is our virtual students will be clustered together as much as possible in classes, so that certain teachers in certain periods are live streaming those classes, so that virtual students are actually participating simultaneously with the in-person students in those clustered classes. And so that'll be the case for core academic classes, as well as our unified arts, performing arts, be that band, orchestra, and chorus, or our target language and world language options of Spanish, French, and German for both 7th and 8th grade students. There are opportunities in those special areas for some asynchronous instruction, but for the most part, students will be remoting into those classes in clustered groups. So virtual students, again, as much as possible, will be grouped together so that there is that sense of community that is built with those students, but they will have classes with in-person students as well.
Great, and that takes us to Dr. Spiller for the high school overview. Thank you.
Good evening. At the high school, we are similar to the middle school as far as having students remote into classrooms in that high flex model, but we will not have any fully dedicated teacher or fully dedicated sections of courses designated as virtual. So again, those students will be remoting into classrooms. We anticipate that a majority of our learning will be delivered synchronously, but some of our courses will be able to have asynchronous components to it. And we also have the addition of a possibility of some independent study for our students. Again, like the middle school, we will try to keep our virtual learners clustered together within sections of courses. But with the nature of our program of studies with potentially over 150 courses to choose from, that might not always be possible. But we do want to try to have our PRVA plus students clustered together so that they have the buddy when they're remoting into those courses. As Dr. Justice mentioned earlier, we are going through our entire program of studies to ensure which classes we can offer at a high level and deliver that curriculum with fidelity for all of our classes. So that course list for PRVA plus will be ready and available to you by the time that survey selection survey comes out.
Excellent. We appreciate that. Thank you so much. So what we've done is organized all of the questions we received, and some that we even tried to project out. So if we were in that seat, what would we want to know? So there are additional things that we've built in, but really they're around these 7 themes, which we then formulated as questions. So you'll see things about the advantages in the study, and you'll hear from Mrs. Gearin about all the work that we've done, really looking at those competitors as well to understand on through, the actual survey itself, how we'll support this into the future and sustain it, how the kids will be supported through their model, the expectations that we have, the different types of learning platforms and screen time balances that we'll have, as well as, and this is a very big improvement this year, the socialization opportunities, because we won't have that pandemic impact on us, preventing us from bringing kids together. So we're just going to go through those 7 questions for you as a team here, and then we'll follow up with any questions that have come in over time.
Okay, so, if you would ask me, does virtual learning work? I would definitely say yes. But obviously, of course, we wanted to see what was out there, because as I'm seeing students learning how to read and making friends through a computer, that's where we set the bar here at Pine-Richland. So we decided to really investigate the different cyber schools that are out there and see what are they offering, how, what does their curriculum look like, just what is their model made up of. So over the past few months, we really dug into our competitors, the ones that have students involved that are Pine-Richland students. What are they offering that maybe we're not, or what are we doing that is better? And after going through many, many hours of research and combing through lots of information and websites, we can honestly say that PRVA, and as we're referring to it for next year, PRVA plus, we are knocking it out of the park compared to our competitors. And you can see a list we came up with 16 different points that we feel are true advantages to being part of PRVA plus as opposed to our competitors. I'm just going to highlight a few of them. Number one, though, I think, and the most important, is that the students who are Pine-Richland students will be taught by Pine-Richland teachers using our Pine-Richland curriculum. And that, as we know, is high quality, high rigor, something that I think everybody in our community is very proud of. And these students will, they are Pine-Richland students, so they will have those same advantages as our in-person students. Other things that you're going to hear about a little bit later, talking about our MTSS, our intervention and enrichment programs that we offer, in my opinion, far exceed the expectations of what I think other districts and other cyber schools are able to offer. And the big thing is the consistency. So as students are moving from one level to the next, they are still, in touch with case managers. We're able to transition them from one grade level to the other. Our student support services, such as our school psychologists, will be able to remain consistent for them. The amount of synchronous versus asynchronous time, whenever we started this year, there was a big concern, like, can students be on a screen that long? And we have found out that they can whenever we are engaging to them. So the number of hours compared that at our competitors, we saw that some students actually only had anywhere from 1 to 3 hours total in a week of synchronous live, education happening. The rest of it was all done on their own. So we have found that this is the successful way to do it. It helps our students build relationships with the teachers. It helps them build relationships with their peers by having them on there. That's not to say that a teacher is just sitting on the screen and talking the whole time, because we're using things like breakout rooms and asynchronous time with teachers available. But the amount of instruction far exceeds what our competitors are doing. And then, just the participation in our extracurricular and athletic activities. So these, again, I can't emphasize enough, these are our Pine-Richland students. So all of the advantages that our in-person students have, our virtual students will have. So they will be live streaming in the classroom, perhaps in the secondary level, and then going to football practice after school and seeing those same students. So that is really just supports them building those relationships. And one other thing that I am going to highlight from this list is our Ramsway, our school-wide positive behavior support system. This is something that this year we were able to transform virtually, and it's something that will continue again. And it's not just about teaching expectations, but it's about those character traits and making those good decisions. And that's something that all buildings and all virtual models will continue to embrace and develop over the year, whether the students are virtual or in person.
So you've heard probably several times now through communications and even in this presentation, select and stay. So I want to talk a little bit about what exactly that means and why. Families this year were given a lot of flexibility to change between learning platforms for various reasons. And that flexibility will not continue to be offered next school year. We are asking that families make a binding commitment for the entirety of next school year to either be a PRVA plus student or a 5-day in-person student. And we just cannot make those changes at any point, because it will take the district a bit of time to effectively address staffing needs and professional development needs for our teachers, because we do want to ensure that fidelity of instruction, make sure that our curriculum is delivered as it's designed for our in-person students. We want our PRVA plus students to have that same experience as being in person. We will offer the PRVA plus model regardless of the number of students and families that make that choice. As far as class sizes, those are going to differ a little bit, of course, because of the way that we're offering it at the different grade spans. But based on the preliminary survey results, the anticipated class sizes at the elementary level would be between 5 and 20 students. And at the secondary level, it's more that typical class size because you have students remoting into the classrooms. So we expect those to be about 25 to 28 students. Some families have asked about the possibility of a student who chooses in-person learning to be able to log in remotely from home if a student is ill, and we will not be providing that option. We would handle those absences just as we have in years past, where you're working with the school counselor and the teacher, maybe even the nurse, to provide some extra time for assignments. Maybe we're streamlining some things. Of course, if a student is out, they'll be given every opportunity to make up that work, and that wouldn't be held against them at all. We also know that some of you have a decision that's largely based on what's going on with the pandemic. So of course, with our Health and Safety Council, we'll continue to monitor the evolution of the pandemic. We will listen to the recommendations of the CDC, the Allegheny Health Department, and ultimately revise our health and safety plan to fit what those recommendations are. This could certainly be impacted by the vaccine being available for various age groups. If we are not required to wear masks in the building, and you have a student that will be in-person instruction, that lack of requirement doesn't preclude any student or even a staff member from wearing a mask if that's the preference for his or her safety. But again, I can't stress enough that we'll just continue to monitor those conditions, and just as we have for the past year and a half, continue to update our health and safety plan accordingly.
Okay, so this next question, we're going to talk about the sustainability in the future for PRVA+. So as Dr. Justice mentioned at the beginning, we saw so many students thrive this year, and so many families, have reached out and said, this is really working for us. Is this something you're going to offer into the future? So we know why we need to do this. We have currently, a little over 800 students that are in this model, and we know that there are families that are looking to continue to stay virtual next year. So we do want to be able to provide that flexibility in the mode of instruction that families choose. This, definitely aligns with our mission, vision, and values at Pine-Richland. Also, as was mentioned earlier in the presentation, this is our little red star moment. So, this year was as a result of COVID. And now looking at next school year, the 21-22 school year, this is kind of like our springboard for the future. So we're taking what we learned this year, we're improving it, we're putting it into place, and thinking this is like with post-pandemic conditions. And then from there, we will continue to monitor and adjust and continually improve what we are offering. So what you see next year may and will look different the following year based on feedback that we're getting and improvements that we are making. Our intention is to continue to grow the program so that way families and students that are interested do have that option, as and we will be collecting feedback throughout the year. The other piece that was mentioned earlier was we do have families that, it's about 70 families that are currently enrolled in outside cyber programs. And these are Pine-Richland students. So by offering this model, we may be able to bring some of those students back so they can get that Pine-Richland education. And it allows us to retain our own students and the monies that follow them to the outside cyber schools.
So how will students receive their supports virtually? With the utilization of a virtually dedicated special education teacher, that teacher will have the ability to, meet individually with students, meet in small groups with students, especially at the, grades 1 through 6 level. They will be able to pre-teach and reteach lessons that students received within the regular virtual classrooms. That teacher will also be able to modify and adapt general education work for students that are in the special education program, be able to assist with organizational skills through various methods and implementation of the IEP, such as a check-in, check-out program that many of our special education students receive. At the middle school, we have what's called an academic support period, where special education students have a period that they can meet with their special education case manager. And we're thinking that that's something that the virtually dedicated special education teacher can do at that level as well. Positive behavioral support plans will also be implemented. And when we get to the next slide, Mr. Minziger is going to talk a little bit more in depthly about expectations within the virtual academy for engagement, especially. Mrs. Guerin has already mentioned the utilization of our MTSS program within the virtual academy, and also our Rams Way. which will continue. And like I mentioned earlier, the interventions will be provided via live stream. So if there's a student within the Wilson Reading Program, that will be provided by an in-person teacher, but via live stream, so that will be accessible within the student's home. Lastly, student supports also include gifted education supports, and we're looking at that being provided via live stream. And we're also anticipating that any student that's participating virtually that has a gifted education plan is probably going to just, tackle the challenge with both hands and really, look forward to innovating their own education along with the teacher. So we don't see that as a barrier so much as another reason for those students to excel. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Minziger for the next slide.
Great, thank you. So as Mr. Hustwitz said, we've throughout the year have been kind of determining the best way forward to think about virtual expectations for students. This was all new for us coming into this year, and we have learned a lot. And so the first bullet point here reinforces some of the things that we're going to be looking at in terms of expectations going forward into a more mature virtual platform and system. And that includes following the discipline code, handbooks of each school, and attendance expectations. And Dr. Seviller talked about this a little bit earlier, but the idea of being present and engaged for us going into next year is very much going to focus on things like making sure cameras are turned on for instruction, making sure that students are actively engaged, so that students can't kind of hide behind internet that is down or different things that have happened that we've noticed as concerns with students who are avoiding assignments and doing things outside of the timeframes that are provided for them. And so we've kind of beefed that up and are going to be looking to really make sure that students are present and engaged on a level that was a little bit more flexible this year because we were all learning this model. So the two main things, cameras being on and active participation in activities in the virtual platform. As I mentioned before, for the middle school, we're very excited about the technology that's being provided to our students, and technology will be provided regardless of the model that you are in. In-person students, depending on the level that they're in, may be able to bring personal devices and use those. Virtual students will have a district-provided device and should be using those. Again, that goes toward the monitoring of engagement in classes to be able to see what they're doing on district devices as opposed to personal devices. In preparation for this presentation, there were some questions about the hands-on activities and the types of things like experiments, or Dr. Justice mentioned earlier, some of our STEAM type classes. And so for both in-person and virtual students, there will be opportunities to come to the school to pick up different materials, whether that's textbooks at the beginning of the year or different things that happen throughout the year in those more tactile classes to give kids hands-on experiences, albeit they might be slightly different at the secondary level than what they see in an in-person class. But there will be adjustments and accommodations to make sure that students who are virtual also get access to a deep and rich curriculum that still hits the standards that we would expect for students who are in person. So we'll be kind of upping our game with our virtual experience, and we also will be holding our kids to higher expectations if they continue in a virtual model going into next year.
The district will continue to leverage several learning management systems to facilitate engagement between home and school. Specifically, Google Classroom and Google Meets will continue to be available for students in grades 1 through 12. That's all students, with the addition of Blackboard and Blackboard Collaborate being used at the secondary level. Currently, GoGuardian is a platform that's used in grades 8 and lower, but we will be expanding that to include all of our PRVA plus learners because they will be utilizing district-issued laptops for that virtual learning. And we know that screen time is certainly a consideration when deciding if the PRVA plus model is right for your student. And we can assure you that screen time expectations will be developmentally appropriate by grade span. Certainly brain breaks will be provided throughout the day within a course, and we expect that there will be activities that could be completed independently, and then of course some learning, asynchronous learning opportunities as well. In grades 1 through 6, core classes will be taught synchronously while special areas are asynchronous. In the middle school, core classes and those special area or unified arts courses will be taught synchronously. And at the high school, we do anticipate a majority of the learning will be done synchronously, just with that caveat that a few of our courses will have some asynchronous components, and then we'll pull in some of that independent study work as well. And as has been mentioned a couple times, just want to stress that interventions related services will continue to be provided to our students in the PRVA Plus model across all grade spans. We'll work to ensure that all student needs are met on an individual basis.
So next I'm going to talk a little bit about socialization, and I know this is something that everybody on this team and everybody that is currently teaching virtual students is very excited about. Obviously this year we were very limited as to what we could do for in-person socialization because of the health and safety guidelines and the different mandates. Looking into the future, we are going to be increasing the number of in-person opportunities. For instance, you can see some examples here on the screen. If there are field trips that are happening, our virtual students will definitely be able to join. Different things like assemblies or special activities. And I have here an example of Science Olympiad. I know that's something that our 4th grade students do each year. So our 4th grade virtual students would be invited into the school and placed on teams and be able to participate in that. We also would be able to offer some periodic optional in-person instruction. So an example that I like to use is, let's say that there is a great science lab that our 6th grade teacher is presenting to the class. In advance, they could let the families know, and that virtual class could come in for that day to participate in that if they're available and able to do that. If not, then they would still be able to live stream in with their class. Also, things like athletics and all extracurricular activities, no matter what the grade span is, our virtual students will be able to participate in. We have seen this year that socialization and great friendships can be developed virtually, so we will continue to use breakout rooms, different collaborative projects, and time, just regular time to socialize with peers. I have to say, we had a brunch for our kindergarten students, all of the virtual students, this morning at Hans, and as the kids were getting out of the car, they were screaming and yelling because they were seeing their friends, and these are people that they never had met before in person. So we are able to develop relationships virtually, and we've done that this year, and being able to add in those in-person opportunities is only going to strengthen what we're doing.
Thank you so much. That's excellent. And I can't wait, for some of those students to connect even more, in the summer. I think as families are getting more comfortable with bringing folks together and vaccinations are more widely available. So that's excellent. Thank you so much. And thinking about the timelines and the milestones, all back in February is when we started this discussion with everyone. You can see the things that have occurred to date. Most recently, the communication that led you here to finding this presentation and live stream session. The individual consultation slots will occur next week. And then again, the survey will be open the 1st through the 14th. And we know that we are in a bit of a chicken and an egg scenario. It's hard for us to give you all of the details without knowing exactly how many kids we're talking about, because that, of course, impacts what we're able to offer. So the greater the number of students who would like something in particular, particularly with courses, the greater the chances that we can even have a fully virtual dedicated section of that course. So it just depends on the individual student. So in looking at those initial interest surveys, we did look at the course requests of individual students at the secondary level to get a preliminary feel for what that would be like. And that is helping us with some of our decisions with the program of studies. However, we recognize that there were a lot of unsures at that time because we're continuing to learn more as every passing week or day, even at times, goes by with the pandemic. So this is our best ability to provide exactly what we can to you now to help inform your decisions. Again, encouraging you, if you do have questions particular to individual students, to let us know. At this time, though, we did have one question rolling in the background. Regardless of the number of students, we are committing to offering grades 1 through 12, the instruction that we have here. So kindergarten is the only grade level that we're not currently offering. In grades 1 through 6, well, 1 through 5, we have the individual teacher. In grade 6, we have the team dedicated. So there will be the chance that in some of those grade levels, we have very small class sizes. So that is, it's a benefit. But we also hope that by doing a really great job this year, even throughout the course of the year, we might be able to attract back some of our families who are taking advantage of other cyber schools at the moment. And into the future, it'll be another viable option. So we plan to provide quality and attract folks back through continuously improving and building upon our successes. So that's where we are now. We'll just double check one last time to see if any additional questions have come in within the last few moments.
It looks like there was one about orchestra, like band and orchestra, whether or not band and orchestra students can participate in person. And Mr. Mensinger, it was specifically about middle school, so feel free to jump in, but I think this just goes right along with those other in-person opportunities that we spoke about. So I am envisioning at Eden Hall, the lessons would still be virtual, but ensembles and concerts and things like that, they would definitely be invited into. Before they have concerts, they have practice, where they miss a couple periods of class and they're prepping for their concerts, so they would definitely be invited into that.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. The ongoing day-to-day lessons and kind of preparation for those seminal concerts would be done in a virtual platform. And then, those couple days before for practice, and then coming in for the concert itself, usually for us is in the evenings. That would certainly be something they'd be able to come and participate in person to join the ensemble.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate it. Thank you for being engaged with us here. And again, this will be recorded. So if anybody asks any of the viewers who are here with us what's going on with that, you can point them back to our website. We both have a Transforming the Future website, and we'll also have one just dedicated to PRVA Plus going forward. So they'll have all of these materials listed there. But we very much appreciate your time, and we wish you all the best as you make decisions for your family. We hope this was helpful. Thank you.